The Tops.
The first time I was treasuring and we got to a local final and we were backstage and Dermot Graham handed me 20 tickets at 528 he had in his pocket for Tops of the Town final. Imagine at 528 Flaggy Lane was packed outside, people looking for tickets. I went out and I was nearly lynched.
They used to put PA out into the streets in the Theatre Row so the crowds outside could hear it. I remember going to the Tops in Wexford and the chairman of the company would be coming down, probably for the local final. And the guards would have to try and get us in through the crowd, you know.
People used to go down outside the theatre and wouldn't have any tickets for the show, but would just go down and stand around. You could have ended up to 50 or 100 people standing outside on the pavement and up Flaggy Lane, and they'd be waiting to see how did the first show go, or waiting if there were any spare tickets to go and see the second show. People were caught up in it. It was like a drug. It was a drug.
The 1969 beaten national finalists Heart's Delight took to the stage in Waterford yet again in 1970, only to be beaten by a team that would take the Tops by storm, both locally and nationally. Joe Barrett remembers.
The following year, we entered again. We got to the semi-final of the Tops in Waterford. We didn't win it. But ACEC, I think, won it, and they went on to win the national final. And as far as I'm concerned, that's when the Tops really took off.
Right from the beginning of the Tops in 1962, the ACEC had entered a team every year with varying degrees of success. Although they had on several occasions made the semi-final, they never reached the holy grail of the local final. Patsy Sheridan remembers the pre-1970 years.
ACEC at that time used to do the old black and white minster show. Back in those years then you had a compare as well, where he introduced every item show, and I started doing that. But then we started getting involved in the shows and that, and then they became a bit more upmarket then, rather than the old black and white minster show. And when they say upmarket, they still didn't lose any of the entertainment value, but they went upmarket with different ideas.
In the late 60s, the production team was joined by Betty and Billy Mulcahy. As Betty remembers, her first ACEC show in 1969 was anything but a dream start to their Tops careers.
That was our first show, which wasn't a very successful one, to be quite honest with you. It was the first one I did, and we thought we were great. But we got a rude awakening when we went to the Theatre Royal. We thought we were going to win it, and we didn't even make the second round.
With Patsy, Betty and Billy in place, and with music in the capable hands of Andy McManus, the final piece of the jigsaw was filled with the arrival of Denny Corcoran and his comedy team from the Foundry. Patsy recalls it was a match made in heaven.
We were together and we were like family, I suppose, and we knew, and we could say anything to one another and nobody got offended by anything, and we worked well together and we came up with ideas and we sat around the table and we threw in the ideas, and somebody said, no, I don't like that, and okay, fair enough, that's okay. And then all of a sudden we got a show where we said, yeah, we like this, and we all liked it from different angles, and it worked. There was no strange saying, well, I think I'm the man here or you're the man. No, we were just a team here. We never fell out with one another. No, we had our disagreements, but that was the end of it. But the whole thing was the good of the show, to make the best show we could. And at the end of the day, whether it was my idea or your idea, it didn't matter. It was the show.
With this new production committee on board, the ACEC put together a show that would take them to the local final for the first time. Featuring extracts from The White Horse Inn and Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, they swept aside all local opposition before going on to meet the Porton Docks in the final. Paddy Madigan remembers.
That was the year they done the Ballahassie and they done the Raindrops. I always remember, Raindrops Keep Falling, and it was only after being shown in the theatre. And your man Marty Flynn sang it. They had a great show, but we always thought that was the only year I was ever disappointed. We done Hello Dolly, we had the spiral staircases we had Wimberry, we couldn't have done any more, and they still pipped it, and they went on and they won the final. They won the national final that year.
In the era before national semi-finals and quarterfinals, the ACEC show was picked to go forward to the Gaiety and went one better than Heart's Delight managed the year before, winning the national final. Even in those fledgling years of national tops, Niall O'Flynn noticed something quite distinctive about the Waterford teams.
They had no inhibitions whatsoever, They were up there and they were really enjoying it, where you could see in other teams around the country where they were all a bit tentative, and not quite comfortable doing these sort of dance routines and appearing maybe in these particular types of costumes.
And the absence of inhibitions was quite clear to see in the ACEC's now infamous Ballyhassie Ballad Group. Part ballad group, part comedy and 100% entertainment, the Ballyhassie Group, featuring Denny, Anne McGrath, Bula Power and Marty Flynn, became a legend in tops around the country and beyond.
The Ballyhassie came along then. Marty Flynn, the late Bula Power, got me married to him, Denny and myself. I was meant to be Bula's wife. I'll tell you, I took an awful lot of beatings on the stage off and all that. But it went from strength to strength. No one could believe how this took off. It could still be going on. Well, maybe not today. You couldn't do these things then. At that particular time, like, it went like a bomb. And I remember one night we were coming home. Denny had a little Mini at that particular time. And Bula and myself, we travelled down with Denny. And he used to stop in Carlow. I'd be asleep in the car. And they'd wake me up and throw out the old gear out into a garden. Say, "You're home, Mac," he said. And when I'd go into the door, they'd be at the putting down the street a bit, and I realised it wasn't my house at all. I was only still in Carlow, that's a fact. And so the things they'd done to me was unreal. But I have to say, they were the happiest days of my life.
The things that they done, and you'd have to laugh. You know, it was so simple about the thinkers. You know, you wouldn't be able to do it now because you'd be pulled up over.
Well, you see, Bula was my husband's. That's the way the story of it went. And I used to give him the eye, and like he'd come over and he might give me a wallop with a stick on the shins. Oh, he had me cruise. I was often black and blue coming off the stage over him, you know, but it was brilliant.
It was panto at a time when you didn't have panto, and it was the guts of variety when there wasn't variety in Waterford.
A revitalised Waterford Glass Show returned to tops in 1971. Produced by Dermot Graham, the Glass were fully aware that it was going to take something quite special to beat the newly crowned national champions. Dermot's wife Teresa remembers that particular Glass show.
And he was doing Aquarius in all white costumes. Some writer in the local newspaper thought they were see-through and a bit disgraceful. But they weren't. They were double material. Because I know Kay and myself made those costumes. The opening was, "And let there be light." And there was supposed to be a big flash of light. And he was trying to figure it out. And then himself and Eddie Frisbee, who was working in Waterford Crystal, made a box, a metal box, with a cover on it. Put the ultraviolet bulb into it. Let there be light, open the cover of the box, and you had a flash. And it had never been seen before.
But advances in ultraviolet light were not the only great thing about the 1971 Glass Show, as it swept aside all local competition, including ACEC in the local final, and went on to the Gaiety to contest the national final against Limerick Insurances. Pat McGann, who would become an arch nemesis of Waterford shows over the next 2 decades, was a young member of the Limerick team that night.
I remember that show very, very well, I can tell you. Literally a mouth open wide at what we kind of saw on the stage in front of us. This was the first year, as I say, up in the Gaiety in Dublin, pre the television side of it. And I can remember fantastic chandeliers on the stage and grand pianos, and it was on a different level, to be honest about it, to what we had experienced in Limerick, and that it was at a totally different level. And for me, probably started my thinking on a different level as well, and that, you know, from there on. The show was fantastic. It was really great show.
Dando Kelly remembers the fantastic chandeliers on the stage were in reality anything but.
Sure, it was all seconds and things like that. We're in the theatre and we said to the lads, "Look, you can keep that." Well, they went cracked, the fellas backstage. "That's for you," we said, "that chandelier," because we were too lazy to take it down. So we left it there. But it was worthless. We used to have all these fake pieces, you know, the load of flaws that you wouldn't see, you know, and that's where you see all those things.
Dodgy chandeliers aside, Waterford Glass won easily that night. And as Teresa Graham recalls, it was quite an occasion for Dermot.
I will never forget that. It was absolutely thrilling. That night that they won in the Gaiety, we came back to the station, and the station was absolutely throbbing. You could feel, you know, when you feel a bass playing and you feel the pressure on your breastbone with it. It was throbbing with singing, and they shouldered Dermot down the platform. I think that was one of the best days of his life. It was absolutely brilliant, you know, such a buzz. And of course came back to Waterford, down to the canteen in Johnstown, and was an all-nighter. I remember picking up Laz at 10 o'clock in the morning, going home. after that.
But despite this success, to some people, winning the national final was only the icing on the cake, on top of what was the true victory.
Winning Waterford was bigger than winning the Gaiety. I mean, people won't believe that, but actually winning Waterford was the big thing, because there were so many other shows in there, and the buzz was always in Waterford. When Tops was on, it was magic, you know. And to win Tops, you'd be drinking for a week after it, you know. And after that, then there was an awful lot of work involved in it after that, because you had to actually build up the show. But in those days, of course, when Waterford Crystal won that in 71, I think they were just picked to go to a final. So there wasn't the same build-up. So winning Dublin was great, but it would not have compared to winning Waterford.
This victory only added substance to the widely held belief that Dermot Graham was an immensely gifted and groundbreaking producer.
Dermot Graham was in a class of his own. He seemed to understand the poshness and the tricks, visual tricks. I remember him Bring On the Clowns, Stephen Sondheim song, and he went from black and white scenery that opened out into coloured scenery, and black and white crowns stepping through a black and white set, and when the set spun around it was in colour, and when the clowns came out the next time they were in colour. The most amazing visual sense, and people doing maps of Ireland and being able to have peace and war and so many different things that seem very simple.
We did a scene from Fiddler on the roof, and you know, on Fiddler you must have your black and your white apron, prayer shawl and all this business. Now Dermot decided no, he'd like to do it in all autumnal colours of golds and browns, and you know, we were all shocked, but then when you saw it on stage, it was absolutely beautiful. He had this creative imagination, it was terrific. He could see colours, he could see pictures, and he moved us people around the stage like we were blobs of paint that he just slapped up on a board. And you liked working with him. I mean, if you work with Dermot, fine. If you were messing about, okay, he'd roar at you and that, yeah. But you learn to respect that. And then, you know, in my case, I would enjoy doing it anyway, so I never gave him any trouble in that sense.
He was very, very professional, very professional. He did everything. He was director, music director, choreographer, made costumes. He told you what kind of makeup to wear. Very, very strict. Took it very, very strict.
He was great man for detail, great man for line. Everything down to perfection. We learned a lot from Dermot.
Everything was again. He could say it 100 times and you still have to do the same thing again until he got it right.
He was looking for the best that he could do and the best that the cast could do. And he was also looking for, I think, a level of sophistication. And this is where he brought in the musical arrangements and the dancers, you know, and the different scenes. He was looking for, I suppose, a good show, you know, and a show that could hold its own in any part of the country.
And as Teresa remembers, Dermot's dedication to his craft on occasion landed him in trouble in work.
He was suspended from work for a week because he missed so much time. And this was the thing, when Dermot got involved in a show, nothing else mattered. So he'd be late at work, leaving early, and he was suspended. And the person who had to suspend him was his friend and co-conspirator in the show, was Tom Healy. But he said, look, I have to make an example of you. That was the story that I heard.
With no local competition in 1972, it was to be a further 2 years before Tops was seen in Waterford again. However, when it returned with a vengeance in 1973, Dermot Graham once again pulled off a masterstroke. With a cast of just 18 people, he sought to prove that Tops didn't need big casts or big money, but could succeed with pure entertainment value.
There was all the rumours, you know, about the thousands and thousands Waterford Crystal were spending on the show. And I don't suppose they were spending any more than anybody else. Again, and Dermot was always pushing the boat out, trying the boundaries. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. He did 2 shows to show that you could actually do shows without spending a fortune. And one was It's Cheaper by the Dozen and a Half, where he had 18 cast on stage. And I forget what the show cost, but it was very, very little. Mind you, he had 19 on the night of the final. I think they got a visitor in, but Cheaper by a Dozen and a Half. And he did another one then, air on a shoestring. And I think it cost £80 to do that show.
This was a massive gamble on the part of Waterford Glass, but it paid off, with the show making the local final, as Mick Brown reported in the Munster Express.
When someone is brave enough to attempt something new in Tops of the Town, he's taking a terrific gamble. Dermot Graham tried a bold experiment with this year's Waterford Glass show, and as far as I and adjudicator James Healy are concerned, it came off. The opening scene made the skit of all the elaborate preparations and lavish costuming of the orthodox shows, and was a very clever and very well executed piece of satire. It was new, it was ingenious, and it was very, very funny.
Although The Glass didn't win that year, Dermot took the award for Best Producer, an award that over the years was to provoke controversy. More often than not, but not always, the Best Producer went to the show that was beaten in the final.
One of the great imponderables of the toss was this: the best show, theoretically, should be the best produced show. So if you win the final, it goes without saying that your producer or production team must have been the best. But it didn't always work out that way. But then again, you can look at it from the adjudicator's perspective. Did the guy who won the final make as much use of the talent he had available to him as the guy who had less talent available to him and was able to turn out a smackaroo of a show?
Locally it was politics as well, because what you were trying to do was to keep all the groups involved. In other words, let everyone try and win something. You know, because if a group went on stage now, they're putting in for 3 months a lot of hard work and then came up with nothing, well, you know, they'd say, so what are we won't bother, you know.
Leaving politics aside, in Dermot's case, Teresa feels the awards were justified.
I think he deserved it, because he was being original all the time. There was always kind of dispute, and Dermot never liked getting it when the show didn't win, because he always would prefer the crowd to be getting the award rather than himself. But I think the Producer's Award was for doing the best you could with the material you had.
The Glass came runner-up that year to the Teachers Group. Jack O'Donoghue remembers the life and times of the teachers in the tops.
First year, we were okay. People didn't laugh at us. They enjoyed it, so we said we'd give it a go again. So in 73 then, the year that we won it, we had a show called Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. And the late Tommy Fitzgerald, God be good to him, was the link man coming home on holidays. So I suppose we were blessed. We had 2 priests, Father Jim Curran from St. John's and Father Pascal Mould Ferrybank, who were singers, and a few teachers and a few people from Ferrybank. And the whole show cost us £63. Now nobody in the show, nobody got paid. We had my sister in the pit and Jerry O'Shea and the gents played for nothing. And if you were in the show and you had to get a costume, you made it yourself or bought it. We had nothing. But we enjoyed it, and it was great fun, and it was a great achievement to win it. Now at that stage they had started quarterfinals and so forth. Now we didn't make it to the quarterfinals, lucky enough, because we couldn't afford to go anywhere. We had no money and we had no sponsors, so we couldn't do anything about it. And most of the people hadn't been on the stage before in the Theatre Royal, and it was great fun, and we got great support from all the other groups as well. We were all more excited when we got into the final than actually when we won it. I'd say in actual fact that we deserved it. Naturally, we were so talented.
In 1974, 4 years after taking the national title for the first time, the ACEC had a novel idea for their entry to tops. Betty Mulcahy recalls Jesus Christ Superstar.
Billy and myself were on holidays in London, and we saw the show and we just loved it, and we just bought the LP, and we worked from that when we came home. We had a chat with Denny and Patsy and the lads, and we decided, right, we'll do it first. They said no, just too big to take on, but we had a chat about it and we decided we'd try it, and it really turned out to be fantastic.
Patsy recalls a masterstroke in the production.
It kind of came to us that what happens in a church, you get this lovely holy smell. So we went off and we borrowed incense and charcoal from all the churches, and we went and we lit it up at the sides of the stage, and we had 2 little fans, and we used to open the side and we left the fans going. And when we were doing boom, 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 doing a whole lead into it, this lovely smell was coming up. We were going, getting this holy smell. And we kept it going, Jude, and it worked, because people all of a sudden got caught up in this. It was this, as you call it, a holy smell, incense, and then all of a sudden JC came on, you know.
Denny recalls an incident involving Patsy.
We got Patsy to go on the cross, and he was left there one night after the show was over and all, and everything was packed. Patsy was still on the cross.
Every night they'd head down to Bill Martin's pub, and when they were down there, it must have been about 11 o'clock or so, somebody said, I don't see Patsy Sheridan here. And next thing Bruno said to Danny Lennon, did you not take him down? No, he said, I thought you were taking him down. And nobody missed me. And I was up there shouting like Jesus Christ on the cross.
And as Patsy recalls, there was an interesting addition to the male chorus.
Men were always kind of scarce, getting men, and we needed 12 apostles. And at the end, it came down to having to put Bula in. And Peter was saying, no, if you put Bula on that stage, everyone will start laughing. But Bula wanted to do it, and he was brilliant. And nobody laughed. And he came out with the apostles and what have you, and not a flicker out of him, and it was just brilliant. I mean, the rest is history,
And indeed, the rest is history, as the ACEC romped to their second local title, beating Waterford Glass yet again in the decider. Once again, the ACEC were off to the national stages, but this time it was to the first ever national semi-final, newly introduced by John Player. Tony Phelan feels there was an obvious reason for these new stages.
When you got more and more groups into it, players wanted as much exposure as they could get, and it became quarter-final stages, then semi-finals, then final. But the problem was like this, even though in the early days it went from February to April, this was going from March to June for a lot of people who got to the final, and it was a big commitment for a lot of people to keep rehearsing and getting the show right.
Denny Corcoran remembers an interesting encounter on the way to that semi-final.
We were going up the morning of the show, and the bus and the lads were following us, and as we started off, we had all the scenery in Paddy McManus's van, and suddenly this guard came out and he said, "Where are you going?" So Danny Mike said, "We're going up to a show in Limerick." He said, "What have you in the van?" The guard said, says Paddy, "we have a few pins."
In that split second, Denny and Paddy became prime suspects in the Border Fox and Rose Dugdale art robbery of 1974.
So we had to take out everything we had in the van out on the road and put it up on the side of a ditch. We didn't know anything about this Border Fox and Rose Dugdale. So after a while the guard said, "I think you can go. Sure, only done no show in Limerick." But just before that, the bus bringing the cast from Waterford passed up the road, and they looked out the windows, and suddenly they saw the Las Vegas scene there on the side of the road in the ditch. Hey, look, Las Vegas scene. Oh my God, will the paint run? If it rains, we're finished.
In the event, it was all right, and the ACEC advanced to the Gaiety for the second time. Yet again, it was to prove to be a happy hunting ground, as they took the national title from the Cork Examiner Group in the final. Betty remembers the remarkable score the ACEC attained that night.
The night of Superstar in the Gaiety in Dublin, we got 100 marks all the way. Everything, choreography, musical direction, production, the whole lot, everything, 100.
Although the ACEC show's main attraction was Jesus Christ Superstar, Patsy is fairly certain it was the show and not the centrepiece that took the title.
No, Jesus Christ didn't win it for ACEC. It was the overall composition of the show. The comedy was brilliant as well. The dancing, when we had 6 dances, Betty had them up to the highest standard. And it wasn't just Jesus Christ, that was only a 15-minute thing. That's what ended the show. I think we were together so long, we were like a family, and we knew one another so well. We became, I suppose you could say, professional on the stage.
Those Canaan days we used to know, perhaps they home where years they go. Everyone, they swim the hands through those Canaan days.
The voice of legendary Tops producer Dermot Graham in a unique recording from the 1975 Waterford Glass show that was to break the mould of Tops.
We were watching television one night and we saw Joseph done by the Young Shakespeare Company. And they just did a straight performance of it. And Dermot didn't like it at all. He said, no, that show has much, much more potential than that. I'd like to do that. And I know a way that you could do it that would put loads of comedy in it, and it would be really great. And he said, can you imagine people like Petey, and Joe Goff dressed up as the brothers, wouldn't it be great? They had a committee meeting when the Tops was coming up. And Dermot put it to the committee and he said, look, I'd love to do Joseph, he said, and I think we could do it, and we could do it very well with the crowd of people we have. But he said, we'll either be knocked out the first night because they say we're not eligible, or else we'll win the thing.
We started off trying we'll see what the best bits we can do for the show, and became so good, and they took out nothing. So he was asked to put a sketch in the middle, but there were lovely comedy scenes in Joseph's, and he thought he had everything. Dermot thought he had everything in the show that would justify it.
And the committee agreed to go, and well, I suppose he persuaded them, but anyway, they agreed to give it a chance. We'll do this. So he did the Joseph, and it was a brilliant show.
It was a brilliant but controversial show and caused much heated discussion.
And there was argument all the way through, but they got into the final. And the night of the final, there was a committee meeting before with John Players and the local committee before the final, and they brought in a new rule. And that new rule was that any one segment of the show couldn't be more than 20 minutes long. And obviously Joseph didn't qualify. So they did the final and the other team won. But it was a kind of a Pyrrhic victory, really, because the better show was Joseph.
Looking back, Teresa feels it was a poor decision to allow the show to progress beyond the first round.
But that left a kind of a bitter taste in the mouth, because really, in all honesty, it should have been knocked out the first night if that rule was going to be brought in. The rule shouldn't have been made on the final night. But anyway, Joseph went on to do, I'm not sure whether they did a week or 2 weeks in the Theatre Royal, filled the theatre, great success.
That was a great money spinner for us, actually, in Waterford Christ. We made a lot of money on that. We were told that this couldn't win, and the whole town were devastated because it was a brilliant show. It was a fantastic show.
The Glass were beaten in the final that year by the Waterford Banks and Finance Group. Des Manahan remembers the bankers.
I can remember the first years that we went on, and all our girl dancers were very, what will I say, they weren't cheesy. They were nice, polite ladies. And the costume, we'll say, they wore for their dancing would be the hockey skirts that they had for the Banks hockey team, which came just barely above the knee, being very, very respectable. No such thing as high kicking or anything else. But it was just lovely to see that different type of person entering in, coming from the Banks, we'll say, with a kind of, well, it wasn't snobby, but a different level of people in, and unwilling to be as daring as the others, but still producing a good sound. They were good singers, and they always gave their best, and it was just, there was a difference when the Banks came in, and they became a kind of an upper crust group amongst the rest. But at the same time, they didn't have, even though they were the Banks, they didn't have the money. They were just as poor as every other group, and when it came to that, they depended on their own little fundraising business.
If the Tops, understandably, is remembered most fondly for what happened on stage, its success was due in no small measure to its legion of supporters. By the middle 70s, that legion had become a small army who travelled the length and breadth of the country regardless of which show they were following. Of all these supporters, arguably the most famous was Chrissie Madigan, a.k.a. the Queen of the Gods.
The Gods, believe it or not, they were the most cherished of positions. The late Chrissie Madigan and Margaret Spillane, God rest them, and other women would go up there and they would ask for nothing better than to be sitting there in the middle of that front, up at the very top. Because they had a great view as well. They were the adjudicators, because when you came out after a show, they were waiting there.
As Nicky Cummins remembers, Chrissie and the girls were the real adjudicators.
I remember one time I done a send-up on Maggie Thatcher, and I thought I was great. I got an award for it. But Chrissie calling me outside the theatre aisle, she said, "Nicky, you weren't good tonight, boy." I came down off my pedestal. I said, "What happened? Couldn't hear you for one of you. You were walking away from the microphone," she said. And she was right. Even though I got the award, Sean Cotter gave me the award. But Chrissie was right.
And where the Queen of the Gods was concerned, no one was safe. Not even her brother Paddy and his wife Kathleen.
Chrissie didn't want the tickets for the stores. What she wanted was 16 tickets for the girls. Now they're all over 50. But that's what she used to call them, the girls. And you'd be up on the thing and they'd clap. And if you didn't give them the tickets, they wouldn't clap for you. And she made sure that the rest of them didn't clap. There'd be a silence when you come out. And that's the way they used to operate.
When I got married first, I was living up in Waterford Street. Chrissie lived around the corner from me in Rocha Street. And the children, when the children were on rusks, they used to ask me to keep the empty boxes, and they used to stamp their own tickets for the gallery. It was only a square bit of cardboard, and they'd make enough to sell a few tickets, then they'd have enough for the chips and that for half time. There were so many in on the gallery, I don't know how it ever held the people.
And when the Waterford teams went on tour, the girls and the rest of the Waterford supporters came into their own.
Ronnie Gleeson, she was the woman organising buses, and especially when you went out of the city, out of the area, onto the national stage, first thing you hear is say, "Come on the Blues!" You knew you were on then that Ronnie Gleeson's bus was after arriving.
given. Ronnie Gleeson was conspirator-in-chief when it came to getting the supporters around the country. It didn't matter which show it was, as long as it was Waterford, Ronnie would bring the crowd.
It was so gratifying and so uplifting to come out and hear this wonderful roar of Waterford people. Whoever the MC would say, and now, ladies and gentlemen, the Waterford entry, whatever, and the roar would come up. The feeling of you know, Jesus, they're with us. We're not going to be left down tonight.
Madge Collins was a regular traveller on the buses.
Oh, Jeepers, what a great time. We used to meet there at the Forum, you know. So we often came home. I remember coming home from Dundalk. I think for 6 o'clock in the morning we getting home. We'd have some time, like, you know. When we come out, then we'd have something to eat in the bus. And some would have ribs and chugs.
And as Patsy Sheridan remembers, if you couldn't get onto Ronnie's bus, there was always the train.
There was a train went from Waterford up, a whole train left Waterford to bring supporters up to Dublin. I believe they had a drinks carriage on it. And the drinks carriage was drunk out before they got the car load. It was gone. They refilled it on the way back, and we came back on the train after winning it. We had a trophy and all the rest. And I think before we got into Newbridge, it was gone again.
In 1975, an article in the Irish Times reported the recommendations of an advisory board set up by RTE to improve television programme standards. In between the suggestions of satire programmes aimed at women and a talk show to complement the Late Late Show was a suggestion of a live cabaret show similar in style to Tops of the Town. But why bother with a similar show when you could have the real thing? Niall O'Flynn picks up the story.
I always had an eye to television, and there were people in the company sort of saying to me, you know, get this on television or else, you know, you know how people can be. My view always was that there's no point in trying to get this onto television until it's good enough, you know. And I said when it's good enough, they will probably want to do it anyway. And that, in effect, is what happened. It was Aidan Cronin, actually, in RTE, who saw the potential, and I had been talking to him, and he came down to Limerick to a Limerick final to see, you know, get a feel for it.
Not only did RTE get a feel for it, they jumped at the chance, scheduling the 1976 national final for transmission on Whitsunday night from 8 to 11 p.m. The influence of RTE on the competition is something we'll look at in depth later in the series, but for now it's sufficient to say that a very tempting carrot was being dangled in front of interested groups. And with the prospect of primetime television on the horizon, the 1976 local final was hotly contested, with ACEC once again defeating Waterford Glass. The first Waterford national final winners again created history when they became the first televised winners, beating the Cork Examiner in the final. In the local rounds, however, tragedy struck.
Tommy Fitzgerald was in a sketch, and he was a dame, and his line was, I have to get into something comfortable. Off the stage, fell. But I remember the girls had to go round him when they go. Of course, they thought he'd fainted or something. They didn't know that he was actually dying. But that was a dreadful year, really. You know, I mean, it put the priorities right, you know.
When you think of it and looking back on it, do you know the old accident, the show must go on? The show did go on, and the Tops went on, because the final was on the following night, and the show went on without Tommy. It brought home to everybody that we're all mortal, and anything can happen to you when you're on the stage, and that was a terrible, sad night altogether.
Several shows highlighted so far have defined the Tops. Waterford Crystal's Joseph, ACEC's Jesus Christ Superstar, Heart's Delight's Oliver. But in 1977, ACEC produced a show that remains iconic amongst the Tops fraternity in Waterford. Denny Corcoran's A Glimpse of Evita.
I got the record down in Close Cantwells. I came home and put it on. I had the whole scene, everything made out. I knew exactly where I was going.
I can tell you this, that wasn't even staged in London when Denny Corcoran put that on here in Waterford. He only done it by sound. He only got records and all that, you know, to put it on.
But we came up with this idea of putting her lying in stage, and then she'll go back and retell her story. She'd come out then and retell her story of how this all happened and how she came from nothing to be the First Lady in Argentina. And that's how we started it. Years after, I went over to London to see the show when it hit London the first time. And how did I open it up? Lying in stage. And it hadn't been on stage, and that's how they opened up the show, with her lying up on a big pyre, you know. It's amazing the way things happen.
Denny recalls meeting somebody in Flaggy Lane who perhaps didn't quite get what the show was about.
The first time I came out in Flaggy Lane, there was a woman came out to me. That was a lovely thing he did on Hitler's wife. I said, what? He from Prawn. He done a lovely thing. I said, Evita. I said that's about Evita Perron.
With that minor detail cleared up, Evita went on to be a truly brilliant show. Once again, the Glass were to finish runners-up to the ACEC, and this time the Best Producers Award went to the winning show, with Denny Corcoran being named as Best Producer. Once more, on to the national final they went, and yet again poor Pat McGann from Limerick was waiting for the Waterford team in the final.
It was an event that I wouldn't forget too easy. My abiding memory of it was, I suppose, the choreography aspect to the whole thing and that. I remember, I think it took choreography to a different level in the tops for the first time. The beautiful, long, leggy, gorgeous girls, if I remember right, coming out of a shell on the stage. I always remember it. I thought it just was so clever the way it was done, and the dancing was really, really lovely. And as I say, it was on a different level. It was proper dance, I suppose, for the first time. And really, after that, I think dancing became a huge part of the productions, I think, from there on. And that it was, I remember their sets as well were kind of quite spectacular, and that unfortunately they beat us. But however, it's nice to be beaten by something that you consider is good.
High praise indeed for choreographer Betty Mulcahy, who remembers her troupe of dancers with fondness and admiration.
I had beautiful girls to work with, and the boys. They weren't trained dancers to start off with, but they were fantastic workers, and beautiful girls, beautiful legs, beautiful figures.
The televised final, however, was a concern for the ACEC that year, with performing rights issues in the air. Denny has no doubt where he stood on that issue.
We didn't know anything about rights or where it was going to lead us, but we were willing to go to jail to put it on.
Fortunately, nobody did go to jail, and ACEC went on to claim their 4th national title, a feat unmatched in the history of the competition. ACEC also became the first group to go on first in the national final and win, disproving the widely held conviction that the team on second always won. Tragically, there are no video recordings available of the 1976 and 1977 finals, although some audio extracts do exist, featuring the voices of Denny Corcoran, Patsy Sheridan, Mary Malloy and the St John's Boys Choir. On a local scale, the remarkable Dermot Graham was pushing back more boundaries. In 1977, he produced 2 shows.
He did the Post Office and Waterford Crystal. And God, glutton for punishment, doing 2 of them. I said that was extra strain.
Even more strain when you consider the 2 shows came up against each other on the same night, prompting some wags to comment that the only man who could beat Dermot Graham was Dermot Graham. 1977 proved to be the end of an era for 2 tops greats. Dermot Graham producing his final Waterford Glass show, and the ACEC group, perhaps surprisingly after 4 national titles, deciding not to participate any further. This freed up their talented production team, in particular Denny Corcoran.
Denny had great ideas to just click to him like this, and then he'd always know if the sketch didn't go, and for the next night he'd be after changing a different sketch. That's how good he was. In 2 nights you'd have a new sketch off and you'd go on and do it.
Denny, I think in my view, was probably the most all-round talent I've ever seen in tops, because he could produce and he could write scripts and he could sing and dance, he could act, he could do everything.
Denny Corcoran fascinated me. He had such a sense of entertainment, whether they had money or not, and he did work with foundry shows that had no money up against crystal shows that had lots and lots of money, but he did understand what made people laugh. Denny Corcoran got humour out of a Kilkenny jersey, people playing bagpipes they couldn't play, just walking backwards and forwards. He had people dressed as tinkers.
Denny Corcoran was the man who could write a sketch to make everyone laugh, even the opposition in the audience who were sitting on their hands doing their best not to laugh or clap had to laugh and clap when Denny was on the stage.
He knew jump player tops. He knew what made something work and what didn't work. He knew variety.
Again, a fella you couldn't touch. You couldn't go near with a 40-foot pole before the show. And it's understandable, because there's so much riding on his shoulders.
Denny, perhaps surprisingly, did not produce in 1978, but Dermot did, moving on to the Banks and Finance Group. his beloved Waterford glass passed into the safe hands of Denis McGrath. Des Manahan recalls a famous quartet he put together for the Banks and Finance show that year.
I also developed a group called the Bottle Band, and myself and 3 others formed a quartet. We all had our bottles filled with water and we had the scale on it, you see, so we actually could play the Blue Danube waltz with an accompaniment, pa, all on the bottles. And that won its award straight off the first year it was seen, and we went along with that. We did that 2 years, but it was great fun, that. Visually very good.
In 1978, the competition expanded still further with the introduction of national quarterfinals. Niall O'Flynn feels that the quarterfinals were to play a vital role in preparing groups for the Gaiety.
That all evolved maybe through the evolution of the competition and through committees particularly feeling that the jump from your local final into a televised national final was a huge jump, and that there were teams, which I always felt myself, there were teams who, if, for the want of the better word, the backdoor system which the GA operates, if they had got another bite of the cherry, they might have come out on top, and that in effect is what happened a lot.
The Banks and Finance progressed to the national quarterfinals in Wexford, but were unfortunately eliminated. A new group entered Tops that year, Raytex, a group that would have a major say in Tops for the next decade. That first year they made use of the comic genius of a young Rick Whelan.
I was asked to be in Tops of the Town to join a comedy sketch. I didn't know how well it would go, but I gave it my best shot anyway. And at the time, a TV series called Some Mothers Do Have 'Em was famous. It was the sort of comedy that was now. It's a bit like Father Ted today.
And I was rather good at doing Frank. So, I was invited out on stage to do it.
And Frank Coughlin actually played the part of a very robust, full of rude health priest. But of course, I'm referring all the time to
the fact that our new guest Betty's very upset about her. Especially now that she started to sleep in our bed as well.
But what the priest can't see is I've got a dog on a leash. A little dog actually that belonged to me, a little wire-haired terrier called Aesop. And he performed brilliantly on stage. He cocked the leg one night but decided not to do it. But and that drew even more laughs from the audience.
Although unable to progress to the final, Raytex captured the Best Comedy Item Award for Rick. This was merely a taste of what was to come from Raytex in the 1980s. As 1979 dawned, Waterford Glass had been without a win in the local final since 1971, when they went all the way to the Gaiety. The trump card in their bid for success was the irrepressible Denny Corcoran, returning to his producer's role and at the helm of the Glass show for the first time. Dando Kelly remembers that throughout the 70s he had a standard speech ready for local finals.
I always remember those runners-up things, and I think over 9 times in a row, and I used to have the speech ready going out. Very well done to the winners and all this kind of stuff, and I hope you win the go on and win the gate and everything like that. But I remember the first time when we got Denny Corcoran, Denny said to me about November, I think I have a winning show. Well, I said, I'll put on a lovely new suit on the night, and I said, and I'll give a lovely speech. I said,
an exciting show featuring spectacular extracts from Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds saw the Glass power its way to the final against a Banks and Finance team who were beset with technical difficulties on the night. Dando Kelly remembers he had to come good on his promise to buy that new suit.
About 2 weeks before we went on, Denny said, you better get that suit, he said. The show was his peak, and he said it's going grand. And I always remember the night when they said Waterford Crystal the winners, after being runner-up for so long. And I was speechless. I just couldn't open my mouth. I couldn't say congratulate the winners. I was just dumbfounded. And I walked off the stage, and I think I got a slating on the paper the following week saying how ignorant I was. I didn't congratulate the losers. But
the second decade of Tops was a roller coaster of emotions, ranging from the ecstatic highs of 5 national titles to the tragic passing of top stalwart Tommy Fitzgerald. It was also a decade of radical change. The number of groups competing was falling, and for better or worse, the stakes had been raised infinitely higher with the advent of television. Perhaps it's best to reflect on the good times of the 70s before we sail the choppy waters of the 1980s.
It was a potpourri of the best talent that was available in Waterford, and it kind of gave substance to the sort of the theory that Waterford people have that we're the most talented city in the country. We're not really, but we love to think we are. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of talent there, but it exists every place, and the Tops brought it out in every centre that they went to.
Tops was people's lives. I mean, it was people's holiday. People used to save up. I think the children's allowance was spent up in the Gaiety. They hadn't a bob for about 6 weeks afterwards. They were great days though. People didn't mind because they were happy. They were amongst their own crowd. And we entertained the people that followed us all over the country. And it was a privilege to do that over the years.
You've been listening to The Tops, Programme 2. Tomorrow.
One of the adjudicators took exception to that because she didn't understand it, and she thought that was an IRA scene instead of being a peace scene. That was a peace scene.
Well, I don't know whether people actually physically got jobs, but I would certainly say jobs were created, let's say, in the, you know, in inverted brackets.
We had Gilbert O'Sullivan, Clare, and we had Brendan Meyer, various people, Val Downey, William Vincent Wallace, Happy Moments, and I called it City of Music.
Just don't think the adjudicator knew some of the numbers we were doing, and you suffer for that sometimes. That's the risk you take.
Denny Corcoran and Dermot Graham had never worked together, and I said to myself, if I could get the two of them involved in the show, because I reckoned the show was made for both of them.
The Tops is produced by Wayne Brown and narrated by Jim Nolan.